Hello, and a very warm welcome to all of those listening to Coconut Chats. This is our very first podcast for many more to come. Before I introduce to my other friends and ladies who've decided to join me on board for this wonderful experience together, let me tell you the reason why we all decided to start the podcast. Well, we are a group of friends who've decided to come together and speak about topics that do not have accurate representation on a national or an international forum. Those topics include a vast range of subjects, and I'm sure you'll keep listening to us as we move forward in our journey. Please welcome my other ladies as I go around the table introducing them. First and foremost, I have Harita Gandhi from New Zealand. Hello, Harita.
Hello. So, kia ora, everyone. I'm Harita. I'm a 32-year-old New Zealand-born and raised Gujarati. I'm third generation New Zealand-born on my mum's side. So my great-granddad came to New Zealand about 100 years ago. And I'm first generation New Zealand-born on my dad's side. I lived and worked in Melbourne from 2014 until 2019. And I moved back to Wellington last year because my family live here. I'm married to a Melbourne-born Punjabi man who works as a property manager. We met when I lived in Melbourne and we got married 2 years ago. I grew up doing Bharatanatyam and Bollywood dancing, and I performed at a lot of events in Wellington and Melbourne, so I got to know lots of Indian people through those hobbies. I work as an accountant for a large government organisation. I studied accounting, psychology, and I also did honours in management at Victoria University in Wellington many years ago. I'm also the treasurer of the Wellington branch of the National Council of Women in New Zealand. And I also volunteer with Age Concern Wellington. I actually started volunteering with them during the first COVID lockdown back in April. I wanted to do this podcast because I wanted to give an Indian person's perspective on issues that are happening in the world right now. And I wanted to give women a platform to speak their minds on without feeling judgment from other people. So yeah, that's me. Back to you, Chris.
That's awesome, man. Now you're giving me some major volunteering vibes. I realize I have to go up onto some of my own as well to keep up with you. Moving on to our second member of the day, Shomita. Please tell us about yourself.
Hello everyone, I'm Shomita. I am from India. I am a Bengali born and brought up in Kolkata. I did bachelor's in computer engineering. I am a software engineer by profession, to be specific, test automation engineer. I am from Kolkata but I am away from my city since 2011. Spent few years in South India, especially Chennai. Spent a year in United States, and now I am in Australia since 2017. I met my husband at work. He was my colleague in my very first project. He too is a Bengali from Kolkata. I am trained in yoga. I am quite passionate about dancing. I never had formal training in dance though, more of in-house training, I would say. In India, if you are from Kolkata, people will assume that you will know a bit of dancing and singing anyway. Probably that is why Kolkata is also known as the cultural capital of India. I love to travel. Exploring new places and meeting new people is what keeps me going. I am looking forward to sharing my thoughts and experiences through this platform, and I would consider myself lucky if I can help in spreading awareness through this. That's a bit about myself. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Shomita. Very quickly about myself. So I am a Bengali, but I was born and raised in New Delhi, which happens to be the capital city of India. I was in India in different parts until my master's, and then I happened to come to Melbourne in 2013 with a scholarship for my PhD. I finished and graduated with a PhD degree from Swinburne University, which happens to be one of the top 3 schools in Melbourne. Have been in Melbourne ever since. Love the place, no complaints. Just one, the winters in Melbourne absolutely suck, but then I've gotten quite used to it. It is no complaints whatsoever. I'm a trained Indian contemporary dancer, and I'm a blogger, and now podcasting has become one of my other passions as well. Now, you guys must be wondering as to how the three of us came to know each other, right? Well, there's a little bit of story there also. I have a dance group called Ananda Dance Group in Melbourne, and that was the place where I first met Harita back in 2014. So 6 years, wonderful journey with her. We'll talk about that later. And it was the same avenue where I met Shomita as well. I met Shomita for the first time for a performance in 2018. Now, moving on to the second bit of the conversation, you all must be wondering, what are we going to talk about in our first session? We are going to be talking about something that has affected us not only mentally, but physically, emotionally, socially, and it has spread its arms and wings all over the world. Well, you guessed it correctly. We are going to be talking about COVID-19. So before taking much of your time, I'll pass the baton on to Harita. So Harita, you mentioned that you were born in New Zealand, right? Tell us about your personal experience about all these past 6 months. What was it like facing coronavirus in New Zealand for you?
Yeah, so for me, it's been a bit of a weird ride. I guess because I only moved back to New Zealand just over a year ago, and I moved back from Melbourne, which is now a completely different world to New Zealand with what Melbourne's going through. So it's just been really surreal that way, knowing that what I used to live in Melbourne and, you know, look at them and look at us, I guess. It's been a bit of a weird ride, I guess. Because my husband and I had been planning to go back to Melbourne for a holiday in June, actually for a friend's wedding. As a side note, that friend ended up postponing their wedding. And we were really looking forward to going back to visit all our friends and just to have a bit of a holiday. And, you know, because we haven't seen them since November last year, so it seemed like it'd been a long time. And one of my closest friends in Melbourne also had a baby in January. So I was really excited to visit her daughter for the first time. Now her daughter's almost 8 months old, and I've only seen photos of her and seen her on Skype, which is nothing near as good as seeing a baby in real life. So the whole Melbourne situation is just really like mind-blowing for me, because Melbourne became my home for 5 years when I lived there, and it's just really sad to see what they're going through. Yeah, my husband and I were also planning a trip to Europe for August for a couple of friends' weddings. So we should actually be in London right now. We should have been going for about 5 weeks, but instead here we are, still in Wellington. And I haven't been to Europe since I was 13, and my husband's actually never been. So for a couple in the early 30s, we were really, really looking forward to this trip. And I guess this is the year that we'd actually planned to have a long holiday. I haven't been on a 5-week holiday in years. So it's just, for us, it's just really sad that, oh, we're looking forward to this so much, but now, you know, but I guess if travel is my biggest complaint, then I shouldn't really be complaining, right? You know, compared to so many other people out there. So that's my little rant over. But other than the travel part, I'll quickly recap how my family and I got through the New Zealand lockdown in the last 6 months, basically. So back in February, one of my colleagues at work was talking about her husband returning from a holiday in China a week earlier than planned, because COVID had already broken loose, I guess you could say, towards the end of 2019 in China. And so I remember thinking, why is he so cautious? Because he was self-quarantining in the guest bedroom of their house. So my colleague was saying to me that, oh, you know, my husband's at home, but I haven't actually seen him since he returned from his holiday, because he's quarantining downstairs and I'm living upstairs. And I actually laughed at her for being so cautious. And she was like, oh, you know, you'll realize why I'm being cautious one day, type of thing. And then she was also saying that they had cancelled a holiday that they'd booked to Sydney. They were supposed to be going in February. So then I thought, well, hold on, this seems a bit over dramatic. So I started looking up online, and I thought, oh, this COVID outbreak is actually quite out of control in China and some parts of Europe, I think, by March. So then I kind of thought, I'll put my holiday planning on hold and just see how things go over the next couple of weeks. And my colleagues kept telling me to think twice before booking my flights and accommodation. So I guess that kind of forced me to just hold on and sit tight. The friends that were supposed to be getting married, though, on the other hand, I was asking them if their weddings were still going ahead, and they kept saying, yeah, of course, why wouldn't it be? So then on the other hand, I was thinking, oh, maybe I'm exaggerating if the people that are supposed to be getting married don't seem worried. But then, you know, look at what happened after that. So basically all the friends that were supposed to be getting married this year have all basically postponed their weddings. And then, you know, fast forward to mid-March, and New Zealand ended up having a few COVID cases. And at work, we started preparing to work from home if needed. And I remember going to Noel Leemings and JB Hi-Fi to buy a second computer monitor so that I could actually work from home if I had to. And they'd all sold out. And they said, oh, we won't be getting anything in for at least 2 or 3 more weeks. So I thought, okay, this is really happening now because I'm not the only one panicking. And at work, we didn't even get the planned test run of working from home. We were supposed to actually work from home for a week just to see how things go within the company. But then the Prime Minister announced level 3 lockdown on Saturday, the 21st of March, and then level 4 from Wednesday, 25th of March. So we had to start working from home as soon as level 3 was announced. So we didn't even get that practice run that we had been planning. But I thought Jacinda Ardern actually did a really amazing job at keeping the country informed during our lockdown. And New Zealand only went into a total lockdown for 5 weeks, which meant that only supermarkets, pharmacies, and essential services were kept open. And there was security, police, and the New Zealand Defence Force Army everywhere to ensure that no one broke these social distancing rules. And anyone that broke the rules was fined. But I think generally New Zealanders trust the government and they follow the rules, which meant lockdown didn't have to be extended beyond the 5 weeks. And things started going back to normal in May. So lockdown actually went really fast for us, I think. A bit on the personal front, I've got an autoimmune disease since I was 17. So I was quite cautious at the beginning. I think if you ask my husband or any of my friends back in April, they probably would have said, oh, Harita was panicking quite a lot. But I think because of my health reasons, I had reason to panic. So I ended up asking my boss if I could actually work from home during level 2, just to be on the safe side. Because I also work in a building with over 1,000 people. So, you know, using the lifts and the common facilities and everything. And my parents also have health issues. So the 3 of us in our household were in the higher risk category. So my husband kind of ended up being the tribute for the supermarket shopping for our household because he was the healthiest out of the 4 of us. So I guess it kind of became like the Hunger Games there for a while. Job-wise, I'm an accountant, so it was quite easy for me to work from home as long as I had 2 computer screens and the internet, which is, you know, pretty basic these days. And I just had regular Zoom meetings with my colleagues and my team every day, so I still felt like I was seeing my team every day, even though I was only seeing their face on a computer screen. My husband is a property manager though, so for him it was a bit harder to work from home because he couldn't do his property inspections or meet tenants and landlords, and a lot of his tenants were losing their jobs and unable to cover rent. And being a property manager, he was always that middle person between the tenant and the landlord, so he was on the phone all day every day during lockdown. So to say he was stressed during lockdown was probably an understatement. My parents are retired, so they just did a lot of DIY things around the home and just kept themselves busy that way. All in all though, I think New Zealand is actually very lucky. People that lost their jobs got about a $450 wage subsidy per week from the government. And Jacinda Ardern and Ashley Bloomfield had live press conferences at 1 p.m. every day on TV to update the country on the COVID cases and the evolving situation. And one thing I really liked with how they spoke was they spoke in the most basic way that anyone that was listening would understand straight away what they were saying. There was no jargon, no fancy language, no inside jokes or anything. It was just basic, like, this is what we have to do. We have to work as a team and stick within your bubbles. Like, they kept using all these inclusive words, which made everyone feel like they were part of the solution. So New Zealand managed 100 days with no community transmitted cases. But last week, and ironically enough, on the 101st day, at the beginning of August, there was a cluster in Auckland. So now Auckland is on level 3 again. So after 3 months of going back to normal life, Auckland is almost on lockdown again, and the rest of New Zealand is on level 2, which means we've got limits of like 100 people at a gathering. You have to be 2 meters away from people, and all restaurants and all public places have that COVID tracker app, so you have to track where you've been going. And something that unexpected that happened last week was that my mum's auntie passed away on Friday. So this was about 3 days after New Zealand went back into level 2. So it was like we'd had 3 months of normal life, and then COVID is back again. And my mum's auntie passed away all of a sudden on Friday. Not due to COVID, but she was in a retirement home. So the family actually hadn't been able to visit her for about a week before she passed away, because retirement homes have got, basically, if there's any trace of COVID in the country, retirement homes basically all go into complete lockdown. So that was quite sad that her and kids or immediate family actually hadn't seen her in about a week before she passed away. But I could really feel the relief in our family when the government announced on Friday that Wellington would stay in level 2, because that meant that we could go ahead with a funeral of up to 100 people. Some of our family live in Auckland though, so they were actually unable to travel to Wellington for the funeral, because Auckland is like in its own little bubble. So if you live in Auckland, you're not allowed to travel to other parts of New Zealand until Auckland gets out of level 3 and goes back into level 2. So it was quite sad that some of her grandkids from Auckland couldn't come down for the funeral, which just kind of made COVID seem that bit more real. And at the funeral, it's like people kind of didn't know what to do. It wasn't like a normal funeral in some ways. And I know that if it wasn't for COVID, there would have been a lot more than 100 people at her funeral, given that she was born and brought up in New Zealand and had a lot of friends and a lot of people in the community. So I was happy that the funeral could go ahead, but I was also it was also a bit weird because of these restrictions. But other than that, that's basically how we've got through from March until now. So that's our last 6 months for us. Yeah.
That's like gives us a pretty clear and a practical picture what is to come for us in the future, right? There's no normal, there's going to be a new normal, and we better get used to it. Moving on, Shramita, you've been in Melbourne, half of your family is back in India, as I'm already aware of it. Tell us something about your personal experiences.
Yeah, well, Australia is now coping with second wave. This one is worse than the first one, but it was kind of expected. We all expected a second wave. And Melbourne is now in lockdown again, and it's stage 4, or in other words, New Zealand style lockdown, the one Harita explained just now. And economically, recession is here, and already almost 1 million Australians have lost their jobs. The company I worked for did a quick damage control by switching to 4 days a week work policy for all permanent employees. We did lose 20% of our pay, but at least we saved some of us from losing their job. The arrangement was temporary. We are back to 5 days a week schedule now, and we are now hiring as well for our upcoming projects. With 2 people earning, I would say the pay cut wasn't much of an impact in my case. It did raise some concerns though. Lucky for me, things turned around in a couple of months' time. Usually we plan for our holidays in advance, always in advance. We had plans to visit Darwin in Easter. All bookings were done by January, and then in March, we ended up canceling the trip like many. It has been more than 4 months now, and we have not received any refund or voucher for our cancellation. It's understandable though, there must have been hundreds of cancellations. Businesses are struggling hard to survive. Still, you don't like the feeling when your money is stuck for a long time and there is no certainty of what's going to happen and when things will start processing. I would still consider us lucky. At least we got the chance to cancel and didn't get caught up in lockdown while traveling like many. That's what happened to my in-laws. They were visiting us in January and were supposed to fly back to India by the end of March. They got caught up in lockdown and ended up extending their stay by another 2 months. In their case, staying in Australia was not much of a problem as we already got a house here and they can stay with us as long as they want. But things got stressful in May when Kolkata was hit by a super cyclone Amphan. Not sure if you guys have heard about it. The city was in ruins. It was all over media. There was no network connectivity for almost a week. I wasn't able to contact my parents for days. It is hard to imagine the pain and anxiety one has to go through when your city is devastated by cyclone. You are not sure what happened to your loved ones and in what shape you will find your house when you go back, and you cannot do anything about it. Between March and May, there were no flights to India. I have a friend in Sydney who was supposed to get married in India in April. Cards were distributed, but he couldn't get there. It was even worse for students. Hundreds of international students were stranded all over Australia. I can't speak for other countries, but Air India started repatriation by the end of May as part of Vande Bharat mission. There were 20,000 applicants and only 7 flights in May. My in-laws got into one of those flights and reached India safely. Repatriation is still in progress. However, the Melbourne lockdown again have put everything on hold. Yeah, that's a little bit about how these past few months have been for me. How about you, Chris?
Well, I think I got the first flavor of Melbourne coming into panic before getting into lockdown was when people started hoarding toilet papers like crazy. So much that it was on news at prime time that people have been buying toilet paper like crazy people. Like, I don't know how much of that consumption was actually valid, but that was the first flavor of something big happening that I could see and feel around myself. And then actually, Melbourne, as you mentioned, Shamita, entered into formal lockdown in early weeks of March. I live by myself, so and my parents are back in Delhi. So apart from having that additional stress of family back overseas, where cases were going on a rampant basis, I had to make sure that I am doing well myself, physically, mentally, and emotionally, because if I fall sick, it's going to be a lot harder for me. So the first thing that I told to myself was, no matter what happens, I have to have a very strong will. I need to eat healthy and I need to take care of myself because these are very difficult and new times. Nobody knows what's going to happen, right? Then Melbourne was well in June. One month, I think we were free to go wherever we wanted. Pubs opened, cafes opened. People thought, well, end of story. We are back to normalcy. Cut to July first week, we saw a sudden spike with over 600 cases in 1 week. And that's when it hit us that Melbourne has officially entered second wave, which was, we all knew, going to be worse. So apart from keeping my mental well-being as a priority level, I had to make sure my emotional well-being is also taken care of. I've been in touch with my parents every day, multiple calls, and I would like to thank technology at this point of time because without WhatsApp, Zoom, Skype, I don't know, I think we would have all gone crazy by now. So that's been happening for a while, and I think, I've gotten used to it partially because I think this is going to be happening to us for a considerable amount of time. We're not going to get back to our old days anytime soon, honestly and practically speaking. So that's something about me. We have lots more to talk about. So let's move on to other sections and other parts of the conversation. Now that we've drawn in countries like New Zealand, who has performed exceptionally well, Australia, who's trying, India, well, less said the better, maybe. I would like to kind of draw a parallel here. I would like to kind of, draw a comparison between countries with a smaller landmass, say New Zealand, Australia, and compare it to countries which are bigger, not only population-wise, but geographically, like US, UK, India. I would like to know your thoughts on it. When you compare these two scenarios, what image comes to your mind? Rita, what do you think when you compare these countries together?
Yeah, so I think being someone that's lived in Australia and now living in New Zealand, I think I can compare these two countries the best. So I think New Zealand is a great example of a country that made lockdown work in the best possible way. I know back in April, so we went into level 4 lockdown on 25th of March for about 4.5 weeks. And I know in April, a lot of the world was saying that Jacinda Ardern has gone too extreme and she shouldn't have done this because she basically shut the whole economy down for 5 weeks. But when I was watching the news, it's like you don't know what to believe, because New Zealanders are saying she's done the best thing that anyone could have done. Donald Trump and people in Europe are saying, who is this crazy woman who's shut the whole economy down? And you just think, hold on, I actually don't know what to believe. But given, now we're in August, I think she actually did the best thing any country could have done. But in saying that, New Zealand only has 5 million people. So we have a smaller country. We don't have states. We only have one prime minister who is basically the boss of the whole country. So you don't have to have different states agreeing with her because she makes the rules. But I think, our government decided to do a harsh lockdown where basically that's it. Like, it's like going cold turkey, if you're a cigarette smoker and that's it, all your cigarettes are thrown out the bin and that's it. And I think she did that so that we could eradicate COVID as soon as possible. You hit it hard the first time and hopefully a second wave doesn't come back, but that's another topic. In that way, if you've locked down for 5 weeks really hard and hit the nail on the head, then everyone can go back to normal life sooner rather than later, and rather than having this COVID thing lingering and lingering for years until a vaccine comes out. And I think, in the long run, it worked. And that's why, for 2.5, 3 months, we were actually pretty much back to normal. We went into level 1, I think around 10th of May. And level 1 is basically everything being normal except not being able to travel internationally. I think during lockdown, New Zealanders generally felt safe in the hands of Jacinda Ardern and Ashley Bloomfield. I think Jacinda's done a wonderful job. Like, for a prime minister that's only about 40 years old, like, she knows what she's doing. And, she herself is a mother, she's quite young, so she knows how to talk to the common person in the country. But like I said, I understand that New Zealand is a very small and very well-developed country. Like, we're a first world country. We don't really have much poverty. And even when there is poverty, the government always helps them. Like I said before, if anyone lost their jobs, the government was giving a wage subsidy of about $450 a week, which is like, it's so good. I think the only thing that New Zealanders failed at were the few people that were breaking out of managed isolation hotels, which kept getting onto the news. I think a lot of Americans even knew that some people returning back to New Zealand were actually climbing the fences at their hotels because they felt like trapped in their 2 weeks in a hotel. I think that was absolute stupidity. I think if you're returning back to New Zealand and that you have to be quarantined for 2 weeks before boarding the flight back here, you've pretty much agreed to being self-isolated before going into the community. So why are you coming into a hotel and trying to break free? I mean, you're not in a jail, you're in a 3 to 5 star hotel, which is all paid by the taxpayer. So a 2-week isolation is such a small price to pay in the bigger scheme of things. I'm also kind of on the fence about the people that are being asked to pay for quarantine costs, the people that are coming back to New Zealand to get like a visa stamped so that they can go back to the country they're living in. I think given that New Zealanders and Australians are quite spoiled because our government has always been there for us if we financially need their help, I think that is making people a little bit spoiled. But I think, that's something you can also compare on with Australia. And I think that's probably a good way to bring in third world countries and India and things like that. So, yeah, what do you guys think?
Yeah, in my case, only me and my husband are staying in Melbourne. Both of our families are in India. We are much deeply affected by what's happening there. Ideally, I shouldn't be comparing situation in India with that in Australia, because India has a population of 1.3 billion and Australia has about 25 million people. But I cannot stop myself from doing that because I am practically living in both the places. The health and safety of my family, my parents, are as important to me as my own. The government in Victoria is trying really hard to control this pandemic. They are literally knocking at your door to make sure you are tested in case you have symptoms. And you are not charged a penny for any of that. In fact, Victorian government is offering $300 if you have symptoms and you show up voluntarily for the test. But in India, even if you complain of symptoms, no one will bother. And on top of that, you will be charged in thousands for a COVID test in private hospitals. And well, for hospital admission, you will be charged in lakhs. And you cannot go to the government hospitals because they are already overcrowded. My family went through really hard time very recently. One of my aunts fell sick. She is very close to me. Her place is 2 minutes walk from my house in Kolkata. She complained of stomachache, and when the pain got worse and the family took her to hospital, almost all the renowned hospitals turned her down, saying no beds available. And when my uncle did manage to admit her in one of the private cares, they literally left her undiagnosed and untreated. She died 3 days after admitting to the hospital. There are no COVID test reports, no conclusive medical test reports at the time she died. My family still doesn't know for sure what exactly caused her death. And all this happened to a lady who was quite well off. I still cannot believe this. We are still in shock. Due to this consistent rise of COVID cases in India, the medical system is going quite out of control. In India, doesn't matter if you have COVID or not, if you are in a hospital, you got to be lucky to have a positive outcome. I know Chris will definitely have more to add on the situation in India.
Well, it's a very grim situation, Shamita. Honestly and practically speaking, it's a mass of 1 billion people and counting as we speak. And you mentioned the category and plight of people who are educated, who have the resource, right? I have seen the situation when lockdown was announced all of a sudden at Dharavi and in Delhi. And
Mhm.
before moving into that, I need to tell our listeners that India is a place which comprises of at least a 30% of the population who are migrant, who are interstate migrant workers. They live and feed on a completely day-by-day basis. So they were in a situation where there was no train, no buses running, and they had to cross states. They had to reach their home cities just by walking. Forget about health access. They literally didn't have the means and the time to buy basic water and food for their families. This is one city which is like breathing with people. And I saw a similar situation back in New York City, American dream that we all see. It was so worse in New York City that people were literally sleeping in car parks of the hospitals because the hospitals were flooded, just because people were so complacent, both in India and New York. You all must have seen a very common scenario in Florida where people were just suntanning out on the beaches, where Florida was in a high risk of cases. So, as Harita mentioned in her own version, that a lot of complacency has creeped in. Some people are panicking, some people are just casual, that oh, it's just flu, it will go away in its own time. But when I look at the plight of people who don't have the means to eat, my heart goes out to those people. I'm not talking about whether the government did right or wrong in those countries. The people, the mass suffers, the mass is suffering, and this is just worse that can hit the country. Having said that, I think we need to kind of, we can't complete the episode before mentioning the pros and cons of lockdown. So quickly going around the table, ladies, I'll just kind of scoop around 30 seconds more of your feed. What have you individually thought could be the pros and cons of a lockdown situation? Harita, your thoughts quickly.
So I think with New Zealand, the pros are that, we flatten the curve, as they call it, very, very quickly in that 5 weeks lockdown. But the cons are that I mean, look at the economy. So many cafes, restaurants, privately owned businesses had to close down because that lockdown just wasn't viable for businesses that are already struggling day by day, and for people that are, you know, living day by day with their salaries. So that's my New Zealand pros and cons. Yeah, what about you guys?
Yeah, in my case, if I have to say the best outcome of COVID is the drastic reduction in pollution level. Now, with much lesser vehicles out on street, fewer factories functioning, the air quality has drastically improved. The place where I live now is on around 25 kilometers away from Melbourne CBD. If I stand in the main road near my house, 6 months back, I could see the nearby railway station at Max, which is just a kilometer away. But now I can see the city high rises quite clearly from the same place. Sometimes it feels like COVID is the time nature is taking to heal herself. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely bang on, Shomita, because I think COVID hasn't kind of put a finger in our eyes and told us that climate change is for real. If we don't take it seriously today, we are going to fall for it big time in the next 20 years. Like, I don't think we are leaving a very good earth for our kids. They're going to suffer much more than us. I might sound very pessimistic, but I think that's the way moving forward if we don't take charge right now. Today is the time. You got to be careful around the situation, the environment you're living in. Another con that I would like to point out is mental health has gone down the drain for a lot of people that we see around us, because a lot of people who used to be domestic violence survivors are kept captive 24/7 with their perpetrator. They have no means of escaping. Emergency hotlines have been set up, but that core stress of facing your perpetrator all the time is just menacing. So with mental strength, mental health has to be taken care of. One pro for my side, you got time. Please don't feel that you have nothing to do. Try out some new hobbies. I've tried some new hobbies. I've started making round rotis, and I've started indulging myself in more reading and writing. I hope you guys are doing something like that too. So now up to the last part of our first session, how you guys can reach us. You can always reach us on our Gmail ID, which is coconutchats@gmail.com. Very soon we'll be coming and interacting with all of you on our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter social handles as well. Please let us know what you guys think about it. If you have any feedback, if you have any ideas, please do try and come in touch with us. We'll make sure that we reach out to you. Also, with regards to COVID, please respect and love a person who's COVID positive. Respect your frontline working staff, and please listen to your governments. They're doing the best they can, and it's all for your good health. Have a good time, stay safe, stay healthy. We'll come back to you soon with another fascinating episode. Till then, take care of yourselves. Signing off. Bye.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.